Welcome to Monk's Temple. Find yourself in a comfortable position. Maybe sitting upright with your spine tall. Maybe lying down with your hands resting at your sides. Maybe just settling deeper into the chair you're already in. Close your eyes if that feels right. Leave them open with a soft gaze if that feels better. There's no need to change anything about this moment except how fully you inhabit it. This is your time. Your space. Your invitation to turn inward. We're about to explore something every human being wonders about. What does it mean to live well? Not to live long, or comfortably, or successfully. But to live well. To live in such a way that when you look back from the final moments, you can say, yes. That was worth it. That life meant something. Two of the most compelling answers come from two men who never met. One was born a prince in the foothills of the Himalayas. The other was born a physician's son on the rocky coast of northern Greece. One became the Buddha, the awakened one. The other became Aristotle, simply called the philosopher. The Buddha's answer points toward nirvana. Blowing out. Extinguishing. The end of suffering. The highest peace. It can sound negative to modern ears, as if it's about annihilation. But in Buddhism, it's understood as the most positive thing possible. Complete liberation from the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion that keep us trapped in dissatisfaction. Aristotle's answer points toward eudaimonia. A Greek word we translate as happiness, but that really means flourishing. Thriving. Living in accordance with your deepest nature. It's not about feeling good moment to moment. It's about actualizing your potential, becoming everything you're capable of becoming, living a life of virtue and excellence. Two words. Two visions. Two paths. And here's what's easy to miss, both were psychologists. Long before therapists and counselors, these two men were mapping the human mind. They were asking, why do we suffer? What do we truly want? What is this thing we call I, and what does it mean for this I to live well? Tonight, we're letting them sit together in conversation. Not to declare a winner, there's no winner in matters of the soul. But to let their answers illuminate something in your own life. Because their questions are your questions. Their search is your search. And the life they were trying to understand is the life you're living right now, as you listen. Let's begin with a story. There was a woman named Clara who lived in a city of glass and steel. She was 37 and had built exactly the life she'd been told to build. A corner office with a river view. A wardrobe of clothes she rarely wore but enjoyed owning. A calendar so full of dinners and gallery openings that she was exhausted simply looking at it. On paper, her life was enviable. Among friends, she was admired. And yet, around 3 in the morning, Clara would wake for no reason. She would lie in darkness, city lights casting shadows across her ceiling, and feel something she couldn't name. Not sadness. Not fear. Not loneliness. A hollow space. A quiet question mark hovering in her chest. A whisper, is this it? She would push it away. By morning it was buried under emails and meetings. But it always came back. 3 in the morning. That hollow space. That unanswerable question. Clara never thought of herself as philosophical. She didn't read ancient Greek texts or study Buddhist sutras. But she was living the question both Aristotle and the Buddha built their lives around answering. The question has two forms. First, what can I do to make this life feel full? This is the question of striving. It assumes the good life is something we construct, brick by brick, choice by choice. It drives us to work harder, achieve more, accumulate better. Second, why does everything I build feel like it's built on sand? This is the question of dissatisfaction. It notices that promotions fade. Relationships bring new challenges. Bodies age. Nothing we hold stays held. Clara, awake at 3 in the morning, was asking both questions at once. And she didn't know it. Aristotle would have looked at Clara and said, "You need to understand what you truly are. You're a human being with a function. A knife's function is to cut well. An eye's function is to see well. Your function is to live according to reason, to cultivate excellence, to develop virtues. The hollow space is your potential calling to be actualized. You haven't yet become what you could be." The Buddha would have looked at Clara and said, "You're suffering because you're clinging. You cling to your identity, your possessions, your very idea of yourself. And everything you cling to is impermanent. The hollow space isn't a lack to be filled. It's a door to be opened. Behind it lies peace that comes from seeing through self and mind." Two diagnoses. Two prescriptions. Two paths. Both, in their own way, are true. If you're finding value in these reflections, consider subscribing to Monk's Temple. It's a small gesture that tells us this kind of content matters. It ensures these conversations find their way to you, like a gentle reminder to return to the questions that matter. Just a moment to pause, press subscribe, and join this community of seekers. Now let's walk further down this path. Let me tell you about two gardens. The first garden is the most beautiful you've ever seen. Planned and planted with extraordinary care over many decades. Every flower exactly where it should be. Roses climbing trellises built just for them. Pathways curving in ways that invite contemplation. A small pond reflecting the sky. This garden has a gardener, a master gardener who has spent her entire life learning her craft. She works in this garden every day, and her work is her joy. When she looks at what she has created, she feels something deep and satisfying. The garden is her life's work. It will outlast her. The second garden, at first glance, looks similar. The same flowers. The same pond. The same pathways. But there's something strange. The gardener isn't there. In fact, there never was a gardener. The whole thing is a dream. The person experiencing it is lying in bed, and this garden is unfolding entirely within their own mind. Every detail is vivid. But when they wake, the garden will vanish without a trace. Which garden is better? If you're Aristotle, the answer is clear. The first garden is better because it's real. It exists in the world. It represents the actualization of potential, the application of skill, the creation of lasting value. The gardener has fulfilled her function as a human being by exercising her virtues in the material world. Her flourishing and the garden's flourishing are one. If you're the Buddha, the question itself is part of the dream. The dreamer who prefers the real garden is still caught in attachment. The awakened one sees that both gardens are equally impermanent, equally empty of fixed self. The real garden will decay. The gardener will die. Her satisfaction will fade. The only lasting peace is not in cultivating the perfect garden, but in waking from the dream that any garden can satisfy us permanently. This is the fundamental divide between eudaimonia and nirvana. Eudaimonia is about becoming the best gardener you can be. Actualizing your potential. Developing your virtues. Engaging fully with the world. It assumes you are real, the world is real, and the relationship between them is where the good life is found. Nirvana is about waking from the garden entirely. Not because the garden is bad, but because any happiness that depends on conditions is unstable. The garden will fade. The gardener will die. True peace is not in building a better garden but in seeing through the whole project of gardener and garden. Now here's where it gets interesting. Aristotle would agree the garden fades. He wasn't naive. He knew we age and die. He wrote that happiness needs good fortune and that those who say a person can be happy while suffering greatly are talking nonsense. External circumstances matter. But here's his crucial move: the virtuous person, who has cultivated excellence of character, can bear misfortune with nobility. They can lose wealth and still act with dignity. They can suffer and still choose courage. The core of their flourishing survives hardship. The gardener can lose the garden and still be a gardener in her soul. The Buddha would nod, then ask a different question. What is this soul you speak of? What is this core that survives? Look closely at your own experience. Can you find anything permanent? Anything unchanging? Anything you can truly call I or mine? Try it right now. Notice your breathing. Notice thoughts passing through your mind. Notice sensations in your body. Where is the self? Is there a thinker behind the thoughts, or just thoughts arising and passing? Is there a feeler behind sensations, or just sensations arising and passing? Most of us operate with a powerful sense that there's a solid, continuous me behind our experiences. But when we actually look, that solidity dissolves. What we find instead is a process, a flowing, changing stream of events. This is the psychological heart of Buddhism. Not a belief about the self, but a way of looking that reveals the self as a construction. And this insight isn't depressing. It's liberating. Because if the self is a construction, then the suffering that comes from protecting that self can also dissolve. Let me tell you another story. A man named Daniel was driving home when another car cut him off, nearly causing an accident. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. His jaw clenched. His heart pounded. That idiot, he thought. For the next 20 minutes, he replayed the incident. By the time he got home, his mood was dark, and he snapped at his wife for asking about dinner. Now let's look at what actually happened. A car moved from one lane to another. That's all. A piece of metal changed position relative to another piece of metal. But Daniel experienced it as a personal attack. Why? Because there was a me that was threatened. The car moving was real. The potential danger was real. But the personal dimension, the sense of being attacked, disrespected, wronged, was entirely constructed. It was the self, reacting to a perceived threat. The Buddha would say, Daniel suffered not because of the other driver, but because of his attachment to the idea of me and mine. His body was never harmed. The only harm was to his sense of self. Aristotle would have a different analysis. He would say, Daniel's reaction was a failure of virtue. He lacked the practical wisdom to see the incident was trivial, and he lacked self-control to let it go. A virtuous person would have felt momentary anger but moved on. The problem wasn't the self. The problem was an underdeveloped self, one that hadn't cultivated patience and good temper. 2 interpretations. 2 prescriptions. For Aristotle, the solution is self-cultivation. Strengthen the self. Develop virtues. For the Buddha, the solution is self-insight. See through the self. Recognize the me being threatened is a construction. When you see that clearly, provocations lose their power. 2 paths. Both leading toward peace. Through very different doors. Let me tell you about 2 brothers. Arun and Kiran were born 11 months apart in a small coastal town. Their father was a fisherman, their mother a schoolteacher. They grew up in a house that smelled of salt and chalk and the warmth of a wood stove in winter. Arun, the older by those 11 months, was a builder from the beginning. As a child, he constructed elaborate forts from driftwood and blankets. As a teenager, he built a small boat with his own hands and taught himself to sail it. As a young man, he apprenticed with a master carpenter and eventually opened his own workshop, crafting furniture so beautiful that people came from 3 towns away to see it. Arun married his childhood sweetheart, raised 2 children who adored him, and served on the town council for 23 years. At his 70th birthday party, more than 200 people came to thank him for the tables he'd built, the chairs he'd repaired, the wise advice he'd given when the fishing cooperative was struggling. Kiran was different. As a child, he would sit for hours watching the waves, not building anything, just watching. His mother worried. His teachers said he was bright but unfocused. At 16, he announced he was leaving home to travel. He walked to the next town, and then the next, and then the next. For years, he sent no letters. When he finally returned at 29, he was thin and quiet, with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He didn't take up a trade. He didn't marry. He didn't join the town council. He simply sat. Sometimes under a tree, sometimes on the beach, sometimes in the small hut his brother built for him. People came with their troubles, and he listened. When he spoke, his words were few but strange, and those who heard them often wept without knowing why. Arun, looking at his brother, felt both love and bewilderment. "What are you doing with your life?" he asked one evening, as they sat together watching the sun set over the water. Kiran smiled. "What are you doing with yours?" "I'm building," Arun said. "I'm creating. I'm leaving something behind. When I'm gone, people will still sit at tables I built. My children will remember me. My town will remember me. That's what a life is for." Kiran looked at the sun touching the horizon. "The sun will set," he said. "The tables will rot. Your children will die. The town will change. What then?" "Then," Arun said, "I will have done my part. I will have lived fully. That's enough." "Is it?" Kiran asked. "Is it enough?" Arun had no answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but he could see it wasn't the answer his brother was looking for. 2 brothers. 2 lives. 2 answers to the same question. Arun lived Aristotle's answer. He actualized his potential. He cultivated virtues, craftsmanship, responsibility, love, civic engagement. He built a life that was, by any reasonable measure, a flourishing one. He was eudaimon. Kiran lived something closer to the Buddha's answer. He let go. He released attachment to achievement, to family, to legacy, to identity. He sat with what was, without needing to build anything on top of it. He touched something Arun never quite reached, a peace that wasn't dependent on conditions. Which brother was happier? The question is almost impossible to answer because they weren't aiming for the same thing. Arun's happiness was active, engaged, worldly. The satisfaction of a job well done, a life well lived. Kiran's happiness was something else entirely. The stillness of a mind that has stopped grasping, stopped striving, stopped needing life to be other than it is. If you had asked Arun in his final moments whether his life was good, he would have said yes without hesitation. He would have pointed to his children, his tables, his town, his love. He would have said, "This is what a human life is for." If you had asked Kiran in his final moments whether his life was good, he might have smiled and said nothing. Or he might have said, "I don't know what good means anymore. I only know I am at peace. I only know the seeking has ended." 2 gardens. 2 brothers. 2 visions of the good life. And somewhere between them, perhaps, your life and mine. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the moments you work hardest for often bring the least lasting satisfaction? You strive for something, a promotion, a relationship, an achievement, and when you get it, the happiness lasts days, sometimes hours, before a new desire emerges to take its place. This is what the Buddha called the second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself. The second arrow is the story you tell about it. The wanting. The striving. The grasping. The disappointment when it fades. Arun felt the second arrow constantly. He wanted his tables to last forever. He wanted his children to remember him perfectly. He wanted his town to honor him indefinitely. And because he wanted these things, he was vulnerable to their inevitable failure. Tables rot. Children get busy with their own lives. Towns forget. Kiran had learned to stop shooting the second arrow. He still felt the first arrow, the sun was warm, the wind was cold, people came and went with their troubles. But he didn't add the layer of wanting it to be otherwise. He didn't grasp at permanence. And in that letting go, he found a peace his brother couldn't access. Aristotle would say, but the wanting is part of being human. It's natural to want your life to matter, to want your work to last, to want your children to remember you. The solution isn't to stop wanting. It's to want wisely. To want the right things in the right way. To cultivate virtues that allow you to handle disappointment with grace. The Buddha would say, the wanting itself is the problem. Not this want or that want, but the structure of wanting. The habit of grasping. The assumption that satisfaction lies just ahead, just beyond, just out of reach. Let go of the wanting entirely, and you'll find you already have everything you need. 2 brothers. 2 philosophies. 2 paths. And maybe, just maybe, the wisest among us learn to walk both. Let's go deeper now into the question that divides these 2 philosophers most sharply. Who are you? Not your name. Not your job. Not your relationships. Not your history. Strip all that away. What's left? Aristotle had a clear answer. You are a substance. A particular, individual, enduring substance with an essence. That essence, your humanity, is defined by your capacity for reason. You are a rational animal. This isn't just something you do. It's something you are. It's the form of your existence, the organizing principle of your life. Think of a sculpture. The sculptor takes a block of marble and gives it form. That form, let's say it's a woman, is not just an accidental property of the marble. It's what the marble is now. If you chip away at it, you're not just changing the marble. You're destroying the sculpture. The form is essential to what the thing is. For Aristotle, you are like that. Your body is the matter. Your soul, your psyche, is the form. And the form includes your capacities, to grow, to sense, to desire, to reason. These aren't things you have. They're things you are. You are a rational animal in the same way a sculpture is a woman-shaped piece of marble. It's not an accessory. It's your very being. This is why Aristotle's ethics is about actualizing potential. You are born with the potential to become a fully realized human being, just as an acorn is born with the potential to become an oak. The acorn doesn't choose to become an oak. It simply grows according to its nature. But you do choose. You can cultivate your virtues or neglect them. You can develop your reason or let it atrophy. You can become what you are, or you can fail to. And that failure is tragedy, not because you'll be punished, but because you'll have missed the point of your own existence. Now, the Buddha's answer to "Who are you?" is so different that it's almost impossible to hear it without distortion. The Buddha said, there is no you. Not in the sense that you don't exist. Of course you exist, in the way a river exists or a flame exists. But rivers change moment by moment. The water you see now is not the water that was here a minute ago. The flame you're looking at is not the flame that was burning a second ago. It's a continuously renewed event, a process, not a thing. You are like that. You are a process. A stream of experiences, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, feelings, intentions, arising and passing, with no permanent owner behind them. The Buddha analyzed this stream into 5 aggregates, 5 heaps, 5 constantly changing processes. First, form. Your body. The physical matter that makes up this organism. Changing constantly, cells dying, new cells being born, the whole thing aging from moment to moment. Is this you? When you lose a hair, do you lose a piece of yourself? When your cells replace themselves every 7 years, are you still the same person? Second, feeling. The pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations that arise with every experience. The warmth of sun on skin. The irritation of an itch. The neutrality of a sound you barely notice. These come and go. Are they you? When anger passes and calm remains, which one is the real you? Third, perception. The recognition of things. That's a tree, that's my mother's voice, this is a thought about philosophy. Perception labels and categorizes experience. Is this you? Are you the labeling process? Fourth, mental formations. Intentions, habits, desires, attention, decision-making. All the volitional activity of the mind. Are these you? You decide to move your hand, and it moves. But where did that decision come from? Can you find the decider behind the decision? Fifth, consciousness itself. The raw awareness in which all these other processes appear. Is this you? The Buddha said, look closely. Consciousness arises dependent on conditions. When an eye meets a form, eye consciousness arises. When an ear meets a sound, ear consciousness arises. It's not a single, permanent thing. It's a series of events, each one conditioned by what came before. Look through all 5 aggregates, the Buddha said. Search everywhere. Can you find anything permanent? Anything unchanging? Anything you can truly, ultimately call I or mine? The answer, if you look honestly, is no. This is not a philosophical position to be believed. It's an observation to be verified. The Buddha wasn't asking anyone to take his word for it. He was saying, look at your own experience. Right now. Can you find a self? Try it. Sit quietly for a moment. Notice your thoughts. Where do they come from? Can you find the thinker behind them? Notice your sensations. Who is feeling them? Is there a feeler separate from the feeling itself? Notice your sense of I. That feeling of being a person, a self, a someone. Where is it located? In your head? In your chest? Everywhere? Nowhere? Most of us, most of the time, operate with a powerful sense that there is a solid, continuous me behind our experiences. But when we actually look, when we pay close attention, that solidity begins to dissolve. What we find instead is a process, a flowing, changing, interdependent stream of events. This is the psychological heart of Buddhism. Not a belief about the self, but a way of looking at experience that reveals the self as a construction. And this is where Aristotle and the Buddha part company most dramatically. For Aristotle, the self is the foundation of ethics. You can't have virtue without a virtuous person. You can't have responsibility without a responsible agent. You can't have flourishing without someone who flourishes. The self is the subject of the whole enterprise. For the Buddha, the self is the problem. It's the source of suffering. Because once you believe there's a self, you start protecting it. You grasp at things that seem to enhance it. You push away things that seem to threaten it. You spend your entire life defending, promoting, and worrying about something that, when you look closely, isn't even there. 2 visions. 2 paths. One says, become who you truly are. The other says, see that who you think you are is a dream, and wake up. Let me offer you a new metaphor. Imagine a lighthouse standing on a rocky coast. It's been there for 100 years. Its beam sweeps across the dark water, illuminating waves, rocks, the occasional ship. The lighthouse is solid. It's anchored in bedrock. It has stood through storms and calm alike. Ships depend on its light. Mariners know its pattern. It's a fixed point in a changing world. That lighthouse is Aristotle's self. Now imagine the horizon. Where the sky meets the sea, there's a line, but if you sail toward it, it always recedes. You can never reach it. It's not a place. It's a relationship. It exists only as the meeting of 2 vast, moving realities. It's real, you can see it, you can point to it, but it has no substance, no fixed location, no independent existence. That horizon is the Buddha's self. The lighthouse exists independently. It's a thing. The horizon exists only relationally. It's a pattern, a meeting, an event. Aristotle says, become the lighthouse. Build yourself on solid ground. Cultivate virtues that make you stable, reliable, a fixed point of excellence in a changing world. The Buddha says, you are the horizon. Always changing, always relational, never fixed. And your suffering comes from trying to be a lighthouse. From trying to freeze yourself into something solid, something permanent, something that can be possessed and defended. Here's another story. A woman named Sarah spent 15 years building a career as a corporate lawyer. She worked 70-hour weeks. She sacrificed relationships, hobbies, sleep. She told herself that once she made partner, everything would be worth it. She would have arrived. She would be someone. The day she made partner, she felt nothing. Or rather, she felt a brief flicker of satisfaction, a few hours, maybe a day, and then the familiar emptiness returned. She looked at her new office, her new title, her new salary, and thought, is this it? Is this what I gave up my 20s for? Sarah's problem, from an Aristotelian perspective, was that she had pursued the wrong goods. She had mistaken status and wealth for flourishing. A truly flourishing life requires more than career success. It requires friendships, intellectual growth, moral virtues, community engagement. Sarah had built a lighthouse, but she'd built it on a narrow foundation. No wonder it felt unstable. From a Buddhist perspective, Sarah's problem was deeper. She had staked everything on becoming someone. A partner, a success, a self worth admiring. But that self was a construction, and constructions are inherently fragile. The emptiness she felt wasn't a problem to be solved by building better. It was a door to be opened. Behind that door was the recognition that no achievement, no identity, no self could ever finally satisfy, because the self that would be satisfied is itself a fiction. Two diagnoses. And here's the fascinating thing, both of them can help Sarah. The Aristotelian diagnosis can help her broaden her life. It can guide her toward friendships, toward contemplation, toward service, toward the cultivation of virtues that career success alone can't provide. It can help her build a richer, more stable lighthouse. The Buddhist diagnosis can help her question the whole project. It can invite her to sit with the emptiness, to look into it, to see what's there when the striving stops. It can lead her toward a peace that doesn't depend on the lighthouse at all. Sarah doesn't have to choose. She can do both. She can build while also questioning the builder. She can strive while also seeing through the striver. She can live as both lighthouse and horizon. This is the possibility that neither Aristotle nor the Buddha, taken alone, fully articulates. But it's the possibility that their conversation opens up. Let me tell you about a man named James. James was a high school teacher in a small Midwestern town. He'd been teaching for 23 years. He knew his students' names, their siblings' names, sometimes their parents' names from when he taught them decades earlier. He was beloved. At the end of every school year, his classroom filled with cards and small gifts and students who just wanted to say thank you. James was also a meditator. Every morning at 5, he sat on a cushion in his small apartment and watched his breath. he didn't talk about it much. It was just something he did, like brushing his teeth or drinking coffee. One day, a younger teacher asked him, "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm when the administration is chaos, when the students are difficult, when nothing seems to work?" James thought for a moment. "I used to think I was the lighthouse," he said. "Solid. Permanent. Standing against the waves. And that worked for a while. But lighthouses get battered. They need constant repair. Eventually I realized I'm also the horizon. I'm the meeting of everything that comes toward me and everything that I am. And horizons don't get battered. They just keep being horizons." The younger teacher didn't quite understand. But something in James's eyes made her want to. James had found a way to be both. He was solid enough to show up every day for 23 years, to remember names, to care deeply about his students. That was the lighthouse. And he was fluid enough to let the chaos pass through him without resistance, to watch difficulties arise and dissolve without clinging to them. That was the horizon. Lighthouse and horizon. Both at once. This is not a compromise between Aristotle and the Buddha. It's something else entirely. It's the recognition that you can be both solid and fluid, both permanent and impermanent, both a self and a process. The trick is not to choose. The trick is to hold both at once and let them inform each other. When you're acting in the world, be the lighthouse. Be solid. Be reliable. Be a fixed point of virtue and excellence. When you're reflecting on the world, be the horizon. See through the solidity. Recognize the fluidity. Let go of the need to be permanent. Lighthouse and horizon. Both are real. Both are true. Both are you. Let's turn now to how each tradition guides us in the actual living of life. What does it mean, day by day, to be a good person? Aristotle's answer is detailed and practical. He gives us a framework for thinking about character that remains one of the most useful tools in the history of ethics. The core idea is the doctrine of the mean. For every dimension of human experience, Aristotle says, there is a range of possible responses. Too little is a vice of deficiency. Too much is a vice of excess. The virtue is the mean between them. Not an arithmetic average, but the right amount, for the right person, in the right situation, for the right reasons. Take fear and confidence. Too little fear, too much confidence in the face of danger, is rashness. You charge into situations you shouldn't, taking risks that aren't justified. Too much fear is cowardice. You flee from everything, even when standing firm is called for. The virtue between them is courage. The ability to feel appropriate fear and appropriate confidence, and to act accordingly. Take pleasure and indulgence. Too little sensitivity to pleasure is insensibility. You can't enjoy anything, which is not just unfortunate but, for Aristotle, a kind of failure. Too much is self-indulgence. You're ruled by your appetites. The virtue between them is temperance, the ability to enjoy pleasure appropriately, without being controlled by it. Take giving and receiving money. Too little giving is stinginess. Too much, giving without discernment, is wastefulness. The virtue between them is generosity. Aristotle lists many virtues like this, each one a mean between extremes. And he emphasizes that virtues aren't just actions. They're ingrained dispositions. A courageous person doesn't just act courageously on occasion. They are courageous. Courage is woven into their character. It's how they habitually respond to fear. This is where Aristotle's psychology meets his ethics. Because character, for him, is not something you're born with. It's something you build, through repeated choices and actions. You become just by doing just acts. You become courageous by acting courageously. Over time, these actions shape your soul, creating stable dispositions that make virtuous action easier and more natural. It's like learning to play an instrument. At first, every note is awkward, every finger placement conscious and difficult. But with practice, it becomes automatic. You don't think about where to put your fingers. You just play. The skill has become part of you. For Aristotle, virtue is like that. It's a skill of living well, developed through practice until it becomes second nature. Now, the Buddha's approach to ethics is both similar and profoundly different. Similar in that it also emphasizes habituation. The Buddha taught that the mind is shaped by its habits. If you habitually act with greed, hatred, and delusion, those tendencies grow stronger. If you habitually act with generosity, loving-kindness, and wisdom, those tendencies grow stronger. This is the psychological law of karma, not cosmic justice, but simple cause and effect in the realm of mind. Different in that the ultimate goal is not to become a virtuous person, but to transcend the person altogether. Virtue is essential. It's the foundation of the path. But it's not the destination. It's like the ground you walk on to reach the mountain. The ground is necessary, but you don't stay there. The Buddha's ethical framework is organized around the concept of skillful means. Actions are not inherently good or bad. They're skillful or unskillful depending on whether they lead to liberation or to further entanglement. Killing is unskillful because it arises from hatred and causes suffering. Stealing is unskillful because it arises from greed and creates attachment. Lying is unskillful because it arises from the desire to protect a false self and perpetuates delusion. But the emphasis is always on the mind behind the action. Two people can do the same outward action, giving food to a monk, for example, and one accumulates merit while the other doesn't, depending on their intention. The action itself is less important than the state of mind from which it springs. This is a different kind of ethics than Aristotle's. Aristotle focuses on character, on stable dispositions that express themselves in action. The Buddha focuses on mind, on the quality of awareness that precedes and accompanies action. For Aristotle, the goal is to be a certain kind of person. For the Buddha, the goal is to have a certain kind of mind. Here's an original story that illustrates the difference. Two women, Elena and Priya, both volunteer at a homeless shelter every Saturday. From the outside, their actions are identical. They serve meals. They listen to stories. They clean up afterward. But their inner experience is completely different. Elena volunteers because she believes it's the right thing to do. She was raised with strong values about helping others, and she wants to be the kind of person who gives back to her community. When she serves meals, she feels good about herself. She's living up to her ideals. She's being a good person. Priya volunteers because she's practicing loving kindness. When she serves meals, she's not thinking about being a good person. She's simply aware of the human beings in front of her, their hunger, their loneliness, their dignity. She feels a natural warmth toward them, not because she should, but because the boundary between self and other has begun to soften. Serving them feels like serving herself, because the distinction doesn't feel as solid as it used to. Aristotle would look at Elena and say, "This is a woman of virtue. She has cultivated the disposition to act generously, and she takes pleasure in generous action." That's exactly what a flourishing human being does. The Buddha would look at Priya and say, "This is a woman on the path. Her generosity flows not from a cultivated self, but from a dissolving self. She's not being good. She's being awake. And in that awakening, goodness naturally emerges." Which one is better? The question almost feels inappropriate. They're both beautiful in their own way. Elena's virtue is real and valuable. Priya's compassion is real and valuable. They represent different stages, perhaps, or different paths. But notice, Elena, if she's honest, might occasionally feel a subtle pride in her goodness. She might judge those who don't volunteer. She might feel that her identity as a generous person is something to protect and defend. These are not failures of virtue. They're just the natural shadows that accompany self-cultivation. Priya, if she's honest, might occasionally feel that nothing matters, that the whole project of helping is just another dream, that the suffering she witnesses is as empty as everything else. This is not compassion. It's the shadow side of insight, a kind of spiritual bypassing that avoids engagement with real pain. Both paths have their dangers. Both have their gifts. And perhaps the wisest among us learn from both. Let me tell you a story about two kings who never met but whose lives echo each other across centuries and continents. King Ashoka ruled much of the Indian subcontinent in the 3rd century before the Common Era. Early in his reign, he was known for his ruthlessness. He conquered territories through brutal military campaigns, consolidating an empire through force. The Kalinga War was particularly devastating. According to his own edicts, more than 100,000 people were killed, and many more were deported. But something shifted in Ashoka after that war. Walking through the battlefield afterward, seeing the carnage, hearing the wails of the wounded and the grieving, he felt a deep revulsion. This was not victory. This was suffering piled upon suffering, and he had caused it. Ashoka converted to Buddhism. Not as a casual adherent, but as a man transformed. He issued edicts carved on pillars and rocks throughout his empire, proclaiming his commitment to non-violence, to compassion, to the welfare of all beings. He banned animal sacrifices. He established hospitals for humans and animals alike. He sent missionaries not to conquer, but to teach, spreading the Dhamma not through force, but through persuasion and example. Here was a man who had built an empire through violence, then used that same empire to spread peace. He didn't renounce his throne. He remained king until his death. But he ruled differently. He governed not from the desire for power, but from compassion for his subjects. Now imagine another king, centuries later and half a world away. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 of the Common Era. Like Ashoka, he was a warrior. He spent much of his reign on military campaigns, defending the empire's borders against barbarian invasions. Like Ashoka, he was also a philosopher, though of a different tradition. Marcus was a Stoic. Stoicism, like Aristotle's philosophy, emphasized virtue, reason, and the cultivation of character. Marcus's personal writings, collected as the Meditations, show a man constantly reminding himself of his values, exhorting himself to act with justice, to accept what he cannot control, to serve the common good. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. Realize this, and you will find strength. And, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Two kings. Two philosophies. Both struggling with the same question, how to wield power without being corrupted by it. How to act in the world without being lost in the world. Ashoka found his answer in Buddhism. He saw through the self that wanted conquest, that wanted glory, that wanted to be remembered as great. He ruled from a place of letting go, even as he continued to rule. Marcus found his answer in Stoicism. He built a self so strong, so anchored in virtue, that external circumstances couldn't shake it. He ruled from a place of inner citadel, a fortress of reason that no barbarian could breach. Which approach is more effective for a king? Which is more effective for you, in the small kingdoms of your own life, your family, your work, your relationships? Ashoka's path says, the less you identify with the king, the better you rule. Let go of the need to be a good king, and you'll naturally rule with compassion. Marcus's path says, identify completely with the good king. Build that identity so strongly that nothing can shake it. Let your virtue be your fortress. Two paths. Both, for those who walk them, seem to lead to wisdom. Now let me bring this closer to home with a story about a woman named Helen. Helen was the director of a large non-profit organization. She managed dozens of employees, oversaw millions of dollars in funding, and reported to a board of directors who demanded results. She was good at her job. Very good. Under her leadership, the organization had grown and flourished, helping thousands of people. But Helen was exhausted. She carried the weight of every decision, every failure, every criticism. When things went wrong, she took it personally. When people criticized the organization, she felt attacked. When the board questioned her choices, she lay awake at night replaying conversations, imagining what she should have said. A friend suggested she try meditation. Helen was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. She started sitting for 10 minutes a day, just watching her breath. At first, nothing happened. Her mind raced. She felt foolish. But gradually, something shifted. She began to notice that her thoughts were just thoughts. They arose, they passed. The stories she told herself about being a failure, about being attacked, about not being good enough, these were just mental events, not facts. She didn't have to believe them. One day, a major donor threatened to withdraw funding unless Helen made changes she disagreed with. In the past, this would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. But this time, something was different. She heard the threat. She considered it. She responded calmly, stating her position without defensiveness. And when the conversation ended, she went back to her work without replaying it in her mind. A colleague asked her later, "How did you stay so calm?" That donor is terrifying. Helen thought about it. I used to think I was the lighthouse, she said. Solid. Permanent. Responsible for everything. But lighthouses get hit by every wave. Now I'm learning to be the horizon too. The waves still come. But they don't hit me. They just pass. Helen had discovered something that both Ashoka and Marcus would recognize. She had learned to be both the lighthouse and the horizon. She was solid enough to lead, to make decisions, to take responsibility. That was the lighthouse. And she was fluid enough to let criticism pass through her without leaving a mark. That was the horizon. This is the wisdom that emerges when Aristotle and the Buddha sit in conversation. Not choosing one over the other. Not compromising between them. But letting each inform the other, letting each correct the other's excesses, letting each open doors the other might keep closed. Be the lighthouse. Be the horizon. Be both. Be neither. Be whatever the moment requires. Let's talk about something we all face, something that tests every philosophy ever devised. Loss. You will lose things. You already have. You'll lose more. People you love will die. Relationships will end. Your body will fail. Your mind, if you live long enough, may fail too. Everything you've built, everything you've cherished, everything you've called mine, all of it will go. How do you live well in the face of that? Aristotle's answer is complicated. On one hand, he acknowledges that loss matters. You can't flourish on the rack, and you can't flourish while grieving the death of everyone you love. External goods, friends, family, health, wealth, are part of the good life. Lose them, and your flourishing is diminished. On the other hand, Aristotle insists that the core of flourishing, the activity of virtue, can survive significant loss. The virtuous person bears misfortune nobly. They don't fall apart. They don't become bitter. They continue to act with courage, justice, wisdom, even in reduced circumstances. This is a powerful vision. It says, you are not a passive victim of circumstance. You have agency. You can choose how to respond. And if you've cultivated virtue deeply enough, that response can be beautiful even in the midst of loss. Think of someone who has lost a child. The grief is overwhelming, life-changing. And yet, some people, in the midst of that grief, find ways to act with extraordinary grace. They comfort others who are grieving. They start foundations in their child's memory. They find meaning in helping others avoid the same loss. They don't get over it, that's not the point. But they don't let it destroy them either. They continue to live well, even in the shadow of unbearable pain. This is Aristotelian flourishing in extremis. Now, the Buddha's answer is different. He would say, the problem is not loss. The problem is attachment. You suffer not because you lose things, but because you cling to them. And you cling because you believe they're yours, because you believe there's a you that owns them. This sounds cold, but it's not. The Buddha wasn't advising indifference to loss. He was pointing to a different relationship with everything we love. Imagine holding a bird in your hand. If you clutch it tightly, you'll crush it. If you hold it too loosely, it will fly away. The art is in the holding. Firm enough to support, gentle enough not to harm. Most of us, the Buddha would say, clutch. We grasp at the people we love, trying to keep them safe, trying to keep them with us, trying to make them permanent in a world where nothing is permanent. And when they inevitably leave, through death, through distance, through change, we suffer not just from the loss, but from the clutching itself. The grasping hand is already in pain, even before it opens to find nothing there. The alternative is not to stop loving. It's to love without clutching. To hold the bird gently, knowing it will eventually fly. To cherish the people in your life while they're with you, without demanding that they stay forever. To recognize that everything you love is borrowed, temporary, on loan from the universe. This is not easy. It may be the hardest thing a human being can learn. But the Buddha claimed it's possible. And those who have practiced deeply testify that it's true. Here's an original story to illustrate. A woman named Grace lost her husband of 47 years. They had met in college, married young, built a life together through every imaginable challenge, illness, financial struggle, the death of a child. Through it all, they held each other. Not clutching. Holding. There's a difference. After he died, Grace's friends expected her to fall apart. She was 72, alone for the first time in nearly 5 decades. How could she survive? But Grace surprised them. She grieved, yes. She wept. She talked to his photograph. She visited his grave every Sunday. But she also continued to live. She volunteered at the local library. She took up painting. She had dinner with friends. She laughed. When someone asked her how she could be so strong, Grace thought for a moment and said, "I don't know if it's strength. I think it's that I never really owned him. He was never mine to keep. He was always just with me, for a while. And now he's not. But that doesn't change the while." This is not Aristotelian virtue exactly. It's not Buddhist enlightenment either. It's something in between, a wisdom that partakes of both traditions. Grace held her husband gently, and when he was gone, she let him go gently. She loved without clutching. And in that, she found a peace that many never find. Now consider another story. A man named Richard lost his job of 25 years when the company downsized. He was 58, too young to retire, too old to easily start over. He spent months sending out resumes, going on interviews, facing rejection after rejection. Richard had always defined himself by his work. He was a manager, a leader, a provider. Without that identity, he felt unmoored. Who was he if not his job? What was his life for if not his career? A friend suggested he think of himself differently. "You're not your job," the friend said. "You never were. That was just a role you played. Now you get to discover what's underneath." Richard didn't find this comforting at first. "What's underneath?" he asked. "If I'm not my job, not my career, not my identity as a provider, what's left?" "Exactly," the friend said. "That's the question. What's left when everything else is stripped away? This is the question both Aristotle and the Buddha ask, though they answer it differently. Aristotle would say, what's left is your character, your virtues, your capacity for reason and choice. These don't depend on your job. They're yours regardless. Cultivate them, and you can flourish even without a career. The Buddha would say, what's left is awareness itself. Not your character, not your virtues, not your capacity for reason, just pure awareness, watching it all arise and pass. Rest there, and you'll find a peace that no loss can touch. Richard eventually found his way to something like both answers. He started volunteering at a community garden. He discovered he loved working with his hands, loved watching things grow, loved being part of something that didn't care about his resume. He also started meditating, sitting quietly each morning, watching his thoughts without getting caught in them. He didn't become enlightened. He didn't achieve perfect flourishing. But he found something. A way to be with loss without being destroyed by it. A way to hold his life gently, knowing it was borrowed. A way to keep living when the life he'd planned was gone. Loss comes for all of us. The question is not whether we'll face it. The question is how we'll meet it. As a lighthouse, solid and enduring. As a horizon, fluid and accepting. Or perhaps as both, depending on what the moment requires. We've walked a long road together with the Buddha and Aristotle. Two luminous minds who, each in their own way, sought to illuminate the human condition. One championed flourishing in the world, trust and reason, cultivate excellence, build character, engage with community. The other pointed toward transcendence, see through the self, release attachment, extend compassion, find peace beyond all conditions. So who wins? Eudaimonia or nirvana? Perhaps that's the wrong question. They're like two different languages describing the summit of human potential. One speaks of fulfillment. The other speaks of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, these aren't opposites but complements. A fully flourishing person naturally lets go of ego. A fully liberated person naturally radiates joy and wisdom. The lighthouse and the horizon aren't enemies. They're different ways of being in the world. What does a good life mean to you? Is it about achieving, becoming, fulfilling your purpose? Is it about finding peace, understanding deeply, easing suffering? Or is it some unique blend of both? The answer won't come from a book or a podcast. It will come from living. From trying. From failing. From paying attention to what nourishes you and what depletes you. From learning, over time, what kind of life calls to the deepest part of you. Aristotle can help with that. The Buddha can help with that. Their voices, in conversation, illuminate possibilities you hadn't seen, questions you hadn't asked, paths you hadn't considered. But the walking is yours. Always yours. Thank you for walking this path with me. If these reflections have touched something in you, consider subscribing to Monk's Temple. It ensures these conversations find their way to you, like a quiet friend reminding you of what matters. Until next time, may you flourish. May you be free. And may you find, in the space between these two great visions, your own way of living well. Good night.